Hi all, welcome to our MIDAS Simplifying Health Economics series. Today it's the second part of the utilities vlog, let's say, today about welfare maximization. So last time it was me, today it is Valerio talking to you about what is welfare maximization. So go ahead, Valerio.
Oh, thank you, Luis, and hi, everyone. So last time, Luis really nicely talked about, individual utilities linked to individual preferences, and he had a very good example. So now we can try to measure utilities, and how all these concepts can apply to healthcare economic evaluations. Now we're going to try to move away from an individual perspective into a more collective perspective, let's say, so from individual to collective preferences. And we're trying to understand uh, how we can measure welfare in a community, in a society, and how we can try to maximize welfare in a community or a society. So we're going to talk about different welfare economics theories which have been developed during the last few centuries in economics. We're now trying to talk about collective preferences, and we got a few things we need to consider. First of all, there are going to be conflicting interests. So many people will have different views about, for example, what is fair, what is just in a society. So that's something we need to bear in mind. Another issue that we are pretty much aware of in economics or in the real world is the fact we have got limited resources. So that means we need to make choices about how to allocate our resources. Thirdly, there is also an issue with the measurement. So Luis talked about how to measure individual utilities last time, and now we're trying to understand how to quantify well-being from a collective point of view, and trying to measure things like health, happiness, that could be quite challenging. The first welfare economic theory I want to talk about today is the Benthamism or utilitarianism, which has been founded, let's say, by Jeremy Bentham back in the 18th century, and it's based on a few premises. The first one is welfarism. Now, with welfarism, we are trying to understand how to evaluate alternative situations. And in particular, we got, for example, different situation of social states. And all we need to consider when we evaluate this alternative situation is that utilities are going to be central. So an action, a good, a service, whatever you're considering, is only going to be relevant if it produces utilities to individuals. So that's what we mean with welfarism. The second big word here is consequentialism, which is the basis for choosing actions. Is linked to the first concept of welfarism. And what we mean with consequentialism is that an action is only going to be relevant if it has consequences in terms of increasing welfare. So regardless of the intentions or the circumstances where this action arose from, the important thing is if it's increasing welfare, then it's good. And if it's not increasing welfare, it's not good. Okay? And then the third premise of Benthamism is sum ranking. Sum ranking is the criterion for aggregating all the individual preferences and utilities. And in particular, we're trying with Benthamism to adopt all the individual utilities to compare alternative social states. Now, let's have a look at an example which might show some limitations with this approach, with the Benthamism approach. This example comes from these references, which you can see here at the top of the slide. And imagine you got three people in a community, so myself, Luis, and another person, for example. And the collective welfare, the collective well-being for this community is expressed by W, and is the sum of the individual utilities of the three people in the community. So my utility plus Luis' utility plus third person utility. Now, according to Bentham criterion, we we can see a positive change in welfare, and the change is expressed by that triangle there, which is a Greek letter delta. So when we see a positive change in welfare, if and only if the sum of the changes in the individual's utilities is greater than 0. So imagine you got a policy now, policy which results in a positive change in my utility, positive change in Luis' utility, so that's UA and UB, but a negative change in the third person utility, right? So Luis and I are benefiting from this policy, and the third person is not benefiting from this policy. But if my change plus Luis' change in utilities are greater than the negative change in the third person utility, then this policy will still be approved under a Benthamism approach. Now, Luis, can you see some limitation with this example, with this approach?
So I would guess the limitation is around societal preferences. Are you willing to have that person losing that much so that me and you can gain it? And I would associate it with typical political decision making, right? If you need to give subsidies to a certain group, let's say to agriculture, you probably need to raise taxes for everyone else. And then, of course, the ones, let's say the people in agriculture receiving the subsidies will be happy, but the people that have to pay for those subsidies will not. So it will create some tensions in the society.
Absolutely. That's a very good example, Luis. And that's what really the limitation around Benthamism is all about. Yeah, that is the collective welfare would increase, but C will be worse off, as Luis was saying. So we need to deal with that, and Benthamism doesn't really deal with that. Another theory which is developed on the back of the limitation of Benthamism is the Pareto approach, which is all about this criterion, this Pareto criterion, where a certain configuration is optimal when it is impossible to increase someone's welfare without decreasing someone else's. In particular, if we have a social state A, and this social state will be Pareto superior to social state B, if and only if at least one individual is better off in A than in B, and no one in A is worse off than in B. And that's the situation where we are achieving what we call Pareto optimality. Now, Luis, again, do you see some limits to this approach, Pareto superiority, Pareto optimality?
I would guess that the problem is that most of the times it will not be possible to not having someone lose. So yes, just thinking about politics, right? Whenever you make a political decision, most of the times you need to take from someone to give to another one. It's like almost reallocating resources. But I would guess if you can, for instance, let's say invest in something, into a policy that is going to generate growth, so that then you can tax that growth and compensate for the money you invested, then it would probably be Pareto optimal, because you would just be creating more wealth and no one would lose at the end. But I think in general it's very hard.
It's very hard because there are going to be some policies which are going to make some people worse off for sure. But it's also important to consider the starting point for these people. And if we're talking about income terms, for example, if we are going to make, let's say, wealthy people worse off slightly, under a Pareto criterion, this policy will not be approved. Even if we are making a lot of people in lower income better off. So we got this problem or issue around income distribution. So again, we got this distinction between allocative efficiency and the fairness, which really has not been resolved by either using a Bentham approach or a Pareto approach. I'll move on to the health sector now, and I'm going to talk about extra welfareism, another probably complex word, but what we're trying to suggest here is that we are moving away from utilities a bit in order to consider non-utility characteristics of individuals, of people. Here we're trying to consider other aspects, for example, health. Health will be central in an extra welfarist approach applied to the health sector, of course. And what we are going to focus here is on need and health. So in a welfarist approach, we were focusing on demand. So people will have a certain demand for a specific goods or services. Here we are talking about need, because people will might fall ill and they will need healthcare in order to accrue some health and be better off. So need will replace the concept of demand. Health will replace the concept of utility in an health welfarist approach. And another central element here is that we are trying to produce health. Okay, this is down to an extra welfarist argument that we are trying to produce whatever is relevant for the decision maker. And for the decision maker in a healthcare system, the big objective will be to produce health. So you can already see there is a conflict between a utility welfarist approach and health on the extra welfarist approach. Now, some people have said also that extra welfarist approach allows you to broaden the scope of your evaluation. So you will consider non-utility characteristics of people, and probably welfarism will be a subtype, a very special subtype of an extra welfarist approach. All we can say here is there is this contrast between utility and health, but there are also some similarities between welfarism and extra welfarism. For example, the fact that both are based on consequentialism, that concept which I mentioned right at the start of today's vlog. So they're both based on the fact that only action which produce good utilities or health will be considered relevant. They're also based nearly exclusively on a single outcome. Could be utility, could be health. And you remember from previous vlogs, we talk about how to convert health into numbers through, for example, quality adjusted life years. And they're also fairly limited in the way they consider equity concerns. If producing health is your objective, any policy which will make already healthy people even healthier will be approved. But we need to consider also people who are not so healthy and how to improve the health of these people. Considering non-utility characteristics will also open the door to other approaches which are out there in the health economic realm. One of these is the capabilities approach. So the first distinction within the capabilities approach is between goods and functionings. Okay, just an example I found in a reference is a bicycle is a good. The way you ride that bicycle, if you're, the speed at which you ride that bicycle, that's your functioning, okay? So what you can achieve with riding that bicycle is your functioning. And functionings are prior to utility. Okay, Luis, you're very good at cooking things. So if I give you a piece of meat, fish, or any piece of food, that's your good. The way you're going to cook it is your functionings. And of course, that will have an impact on your ability to consume that particular food and if it gives you satisfaction or not. Okay, so I know it's not your case, Luis, but if you cook something really badly, it's not going to give you a lot of utilities. If you cook something really nicely, as you do, it's going to give you a lot of satisfaction and utilities. So functionings are prior to utilities. Capabilities, instead, is considering what a person could have achieved, right? So functionings is telling you what a person is achieving right now, but capabilities will tell you the potential, basically, what you could have achieved. And that will give you an indication of your overall quality of life and the gap you got between where you are now and your overall quality of life, which you could have achieved. Now, as you probably guess, this approach will also face some problems in terms of quantifying capabilities. Capabilities will change across different individuals in a society. It will not be straightforward to define, which capabilities we are interested in. But at the end of the day, if we probably have to make decision on a few salient key capabilities we want to focus on. So that's all for today, and I hope you liked Luis' first part of this vlog on individual utilities. I hope you liked the second part of this vlog on collective utilities. Thank you very much, everyone, and see you next time.
Thank you.